Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this Gen X Wasteland and Aeon Byte hybrid stream. I thought it would be perfect considering the topic, since we'll be talking some rock music. And yes, you can hear it on the Aeon Byte channel and as well as my own personal channel. And it will be available on both the Gen X Wasteland podcast provider and the Aeon Byte and through Substack. And for members, you'll get the full thing plus the bonus. So glad to see everybody here. If you are streaming live, and as always, it is an honor and a pleasure to have back Gary Lachman. This time he'll discuss a book I really enjoyed, Touched by the Presence, from Blondie's Bowie and rock and roll to magic and the occult. Gary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Miguel, and how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be alive. And with us, we've got my Gen X Wasteland Wing Thing, as we all agreed would be the title of the show. Wing Stop at the Wing Thing. We've got Dr. Sherilyn Jones. Sherilyn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I never dreamed I'd sound like a Dr. Seuss character, but there it is. That'll have to be my alter ego for this holiday season. I'm doing really
welcome
well.
Welcome to 2025. Yes, welcome to 2020. Everything's off the table. All bets are off.
What table?
What table? Yeah. It's like my friend says, sometimes I want to quote Yeats's The Second Coming, and the center cannot hold. And he's like, what center? Yeats never imagined a world where there would be no center. But here we are making sense. And I think your book, it is useful. It is very useful. Tell us about the book and why you decided to write it.
Well, it's very strange. I wrote the book. If you get through it and you get to the acknowledgments at the end, I actually say I wrote this book in order to stay sane, and I qualify that by saying whether I was successful at it or not. It's an open question, but that was motivation. And Aeon Byte and the Gnostic world and all of that. I mean, talk about the archons. They were living above me for a while in the form of neighbors from hell. And actually, if this was in hell, they would be called neighbors from hell, too. They would be called neighbors from the ultra hell, the even more hell than hell. So I can't name any names for legal reasons. But I went through a very difficult time. And I was driven out of my flat because the noise was just beyond endurance, and I didn't have any work. And if you're a compulsive writer, you go through this thing where you can't wait to get a break. And as soon as you don't have any work, you don't know what to do with yourself, and you have no idea what to do. And life is this endless wasteland of like, what do I do with myself now? And so that combined with the archons living above me, I wound up spending even more time than I usually do at the British Library here in London, which is a wonderful haven for people who have nowhere else to go who like books. And I just was there. I had finished work on a book, the previous book, this book about Maurice Nicoll, who was started out as a Jungian, then became a follower of Gurdjieff and Uspensky. And so I just was sitting there and thinking, I need to do something to keep myself together. And I thought, well, people often ask me, how did I go from playing in rock bands to doing what I do? So I thought, well, gee, how did I? How did that happen? So with not the thought of pitching it to anybody, I didn't pitch the idea to a publisher or anything. I just started writing. So I just said, but that line, actually, I'm often asked how I went from being a rock star, blah, blah, blah. And so this book will be an attempt to answer that question. And that's what it is.
Yes, and it's a great answer because for the audience, not only does Gary give us, his intimate life challenges, shifts, and all that, but he also, I like how you always cover the zeitgeist of the time, what was going on in the 60s, what was popular with music and the occult. So we get this sort of what was going on in society, how it affected you, but how it was affecting all of culture itself. So obviously so many similarities, even somebody like Sherilyn and I who are Gen X, comic books, the bookstores, music, all these triggers that formed us and influenced us. And one of maybe Sherilyn should cover her ears because she is a Jungian, but it always stuck out to me how you were a voracious reader, and I would have done the same thing. How you one day just you stole a book of Jung.
Yeah. But when I went to high school, I came across Jung's name from reading Hermann Hesse. I was one of the many millions of adolescent casualties of the Hermann Hesse posthumous bestsellerdom. And I was given a copy of Siddhartha by this hippie girl I had a crush on. And to this day, I remember her braless breasts and flannel shirt and patchouli oil. But that was my introduction to serious literature. And I became a Hesse fanatic. And Jung was mentioned. Damien, if you know the Hesse novel, that's like the most Gnostic and the most Jungian and all of that. And so I saw in my high school library, they had Jung's Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And so I checked it out and neglected to return it until many years later when I well, the funny thing is, I'm sort of giving it away. And when I was writing the book, I firmly believed that at one point when I was living in Los Angeles, I came across it in a fit of guilt. I packed it up and sent it back to the high school. But my very good friend, Lisa Jane Persky, with whose presence I was in touch, and we'll get on to that, and then she was the inspiration for the song, and subsequently the title of the book is an allusion to a Blondie song, I'm Always Touched by Your Presence. Right. But she just sent me a text saying, no, I have that. She has the book. And I'm looking, I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, this is like false memory. My God, no, good thing I wrote this memoir now. Well, I was still able to remember some things. It's not completely made up. But it's a weird thing. I'm sorry.
You might get visited by Seinfeld's library police. I don't know if you watched it.
Well, in any case, I didn't check. I neglected to return Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, and this was one of my introductions to Jung. And if I'm correct, I think that edition had the 7 Sermons to the Dead. Some of them have and some of them didn't, and some of the translations. But I remember reading that. I mean, but I was like 14 or something like that. So I mean,
I would have done the same.
Yeah, so 14, 15, I'm introduced to this kind of stuff. And prior to that, it was like comic books and H.P. Lovecraft and weird tales and fantasy. Oh, and all the Conan kind of stories, with these fantastic hyper-erotic, fantastic paintings by this fellow Frank Frazetta, who, no matter what Conan, Conan's fighting off some demon or monster, and then there's some scantily clad, incredibly curvy women at his feet there and all that, and for adolescents like me. So I was like, Conan and Hesse. So it's a weird combination. So that's where I was at when I was about 14.
Yeah, well, people in the chats are wondering if you're going to return the book. Now everybody wants everybody's going to be checking their internet every day, and maybe there'll be a picture.
No, my friend's going to use it against me as evidence that I claim to have a great memory, but I make it all up. So
it happens. Yeah, Hermann Hesse. Yeah, of course. A Jungian, and he was part of the 60s Renaissance. Obviously, there's the dark side because through Hesse, Charles Manson got these strange ideas about Abraxas. And I don't know if you read Tom O'Neill's Chaos, but his speeches are straight out of Jung, 7 Sermons, except there's a twist, right? There's a kill and violence, but he's talking about, so there's always the shadow side. But what I want to focus, obviously, on this show, we talk about Gnosticism, and you're going to do a lot of interviews, so lean on the Gnostic and Jungian side. But it seems the Gnosis is one of the big things that has driven you, right, Gary? When you read Hermann Hesse, you're like, I am a Gnostic. You had a band called the Gnosis. You certainly, the No. You talk about Colin Wilson's Robot, Gurdjieff's Asleep. There's all these sort of Gnostic Gnosis themes throughout your life. And of course, you're not talking, as scholars say, Gnosis was not exclusive to the Gnostics in ancient Alexandria, early Christianity. Everybody wanted this Gnosis, whether you're Neoplatonist or something like that. So you're not like, well, Yaldabaoth and his archons are about to invade me, but you always believed in this idea of Gnosis, right?
Oh yeah, well, there's some immediate, kind of experience. And funnily enough, I mean, I should have mentioned this in the book, but I didn't. But I say that the band I had in between when I left Blondie, a great career move. They were just on their way up, but I had to strike out on my own, which is a real Gnostic thing to do. And my band was called the No, K-N-O-W. But I should have mentioned this in the book. One of the great Gnostics was Valentinus, and my stage name is Gary Valentine
Right there.
back then. So that's there. I intuitively knew a link with that. But no, I came across it must have been through Jung and Abraxas, certainly Hesse, Damien Abraxas. And then, even the rock bands, it was Santana. They had an album called Abraxas. And
the Wilson brothers and the Beach Boys, huge Hesse fans.
Yeah,
he was everywhere.
So it was like something that was in the air, as it were, the zeitgeist. And but no, it was that appetite or that drive for that kind of immediate knowledge rather than dogma or belief and that sort of thing. And I think that takes many forms rather than there being a specific form that, oh no, that's not Gnosis, that's something else. I mean, it's that, the hunger for that. And then I think there's certain experiences you have. They don't necessarily, how should I say, spiritual in the sense of supernatural, but they're a kind of immediate, very vivid experience of reality. A kind, and in a way, it's more almost like insight. So, which is knowledge. So it may not be like a sensory kind of visionary kind of experience, but it's an insight, and that's something I would say that at a certain point I realized that's what I wanted to have, and I pursued it in many different ways. And in the book, there's I talk about different ways that I pursued it.
Yeah, for sure. And one of them that also, again, keeping with the Gnostic theme is, I think your days with Blondie, you were having a psychic connection with your girlfriend. And one of them was you're watching, of all things, The Prisoner, one of the most Gnostic shows in the world. And you went like, your aha moment when it was like, what's the meaning of life? But I figured out who number one was. And she got it, right?
Oh yeah, no, yes, we were certainly fans of that. And well, this is Lisa, who I mentioned about the song. And we had, my first foray into writing about the sort of thing that I made a subsequent career out of, I make a living out of, so I guess that counts as a career. The books I started writing 30 years ago, my first stab at it was a song. And it's a song, it's a Blondie hit, longer ago than I care to admit, but it's paid the rent at different times. But it was called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," and it came out in 1978. It was a hit in the UK and Europe, not so much in the States. But other people covered it. Annie Lennox did a cover of it, and Tracy Ullman as well. But it was a song about, on the first Blondie North American tour in '77, we were the support act for Iggy Pop. And Iggy Pop had been resurrected, as it were, by David Bowie. His career had gone in decline, and then Bowie pulled him out. And actually on this tour, Bowie was the incognito keyboardist. So it was a time before internet, mobile phones, anything like that. So for word to get around, it was old-fashioned word of mouth. And if you wanted to make a phone call, you and the other person had to be at a certain place at a certain time, unlike today, which our spatial temporal relationships in terms of communication are extremely fluid. You can do it anywhere, anytime. Back then, you had to be in one certain place on the planet, and the other person had to be as well. And whenever Lisa had the list of the hotels we'd be at, so wherever I'm in Detroit or something like that, and I get the urge to call her, on the hotel phone, and then she's about to call me. Oh, I just was going to call you. I just was looking at where you were, what the hotel, or similarly, she would call me, and I was about to call you. And then we start talking, and we realized we were having these shared dreams. I wish I could remember the content of the dreams now. I can't, but we did. And this was the inspiration for the song about being in touch with her presence. And in the book, I wonder, because all of my interest in this sort of stuff starts when I just started playing with Blondie. and we're living in this rundown, illegal loft space on the Bowery in New York. Back in the day when the Bowery was the Bowery, now it's not. It's, you know, you can't forget the rents. You can't afford the cappuccinos. You know, it's just that it's so upmarket now. It's ridiculous. Although I have to say, last time I was there, 2019, where I lived on the Bowery with Debbie, Harry, and Chris Stein, it looked exactly the same. It was miraculously preserved. Although I hope whoever's paying nosebleed rents living inside the place, it's better than it was when we lived there, because it was a complete dump. It was just, my God, you can't believe what the squalor I lived in. But in any case, in this place, the guy who had the lease, insofar as there was anything like that on the building, he was into Aleister Crowley. And he was a wild, flamboyant, gay biker artist who was totally into the Hells Angels, who, by the way, occupied East 3rd Street between 2nd Avenue and 1st Avenue over in the East Village. And you didn't walk down that street unless you absolutely had to or had paid tribute. But no, he was totally into the Hells Angels. And voluntarily, he and a boyfriend of his went through all the initiation rituals you have to join the Hells Angels, and let me tell you, they're pretty rough stuff. But in any case, he was into Crowley, and he had the Crowley Thoth Tarot deck, and he would do these impromptu readings, or he read from Diary of a Drug Fiend, and that was how I first got interested, because I had no interest in the occult magic per se. I mean, I mentioned Lovecraft and all of that. I read weird fiction, and I also loved all the 1930s and 40s Universal black and white classic horror films, in which I watched on television when I was growing up, like, you know, thousands of other kids and all that. So, but I read a lot. I was reading Hesse, I read Nietzsche, existentialism, but I hadn't got into magic yet. But in that context there, I'm 19 years old, and this fellow's like really flamboyant and wild, and I got totally into it. And then the big book for me at the time was Colin Wilson's The Occult, which just came out. It was only a few years earlier, 1971. I read it first in 75. But it was such a well-written, page-turner, exciting, you know, book about all this stuff from this kind of context of a philosophy of consciousness that he had been working on. You know, I didn't know about that, but, you know, the previous 15 years. So it just was, you know, mind blowing in the old way. We used to say, like, my God, this is fantastic, this book. And that just like completely got me interested in it. And it was a great time for that to happen, because there was this occult revival going on in the 70s, and there was so much literature available in all the bookshops and all that, especially Weiser's, which was the great classical, you know, occult bookshop in New York.
Yeah, for sure. There's a quote, I don't know, that I'm thinking about, but yeah, you were part of the nascent punk movement. And we always wonder, well, what happened to punk? You know, I mean, it continued, but it really swelled.
The Sex Pistols, that's what happened to punk. The Sex Pistols, no, but all went downhill.
Well, Elvis Costello had a different answer. When somebody asked him, well, how did New Wave come and take over? He said, oh, well, the punk rockers learned to play their instruments. It was a great line.
Well, I think, but what was happening in New York, it wasn't called punk. That was the thing. It wasn't called punk. The early days, it was New York rock or street rock, or they didn't know underground rock. Nobody knew what to call it. And it was all different. I mean, Television was this great guitar band, and they were atypical, you know, because they actually were melodic. And Verlaine and Richard Lloyd were great guitarists. But then you had the Ramones, which were, you know, 1.5 minute songs. Funnily enough, the Ramones wanted to be the Bay City Rollers. They wanted to be like, you know, pop, you know, stars. And the punk thing was a kind of joke for them, you know. They didn't really take it seriously. And then Talking Heads was different, and Blondie was different. So all these different bands. So unlike sort of the uniformity of the UK punk with the easily recognized, you know, safety pins and all that kind of thing. But yeah, so, and it wasn't called punk until that started to happen. But I don't know. I mean, for me, the early days in CBGB's, that's always the golden time, you know, before the suits turn up and everybody gets signed, and then it becomes serious and you're in the real world in the record industry and all that. I mean, luckily I escaped that, because I didn't get a record contract with my own band, and I was able to maintain my outsider character. And I say today, anybody can be a rock star. I'm a cult figure.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. You also, speaking again, want to know about Gary's experiences, but you say you did, you drew the I Ching. Do you still consult I Ching?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I still do. Yeah, I save it for really important things, like, what should I have for dinner? No, I'm joking. No, I save it really for. But I started back in. I still have the same copy I got in 1978 at a secondhand bookshop in Santa Monica, in Los Angeles, when I had left Blondie and moved to LA. Lisa had gone ahead because she was pursuing her acting career, and she wound up making quite a few films, TV films, and films in the 80s and 90s, and so on and so on. And so I had gone there, and that's where my interest in this stuff really took off. Because well, among other things, there used to be this fantastic bookshop called Gilbert's on Hollywood Boulevard. The people like David Bowie and Jimmy Page and Kenneth Anger, the avant-garde filmmaker, and other named people would go and get Crowleyana. It wasn't specifically occult bookshop, but they had a big occult section, and they were very, very good at it, and they had good stuff. And again, this is long before the internet, anything like that. They had a bulletin board, this old thing on a wall that people pinned pieces of paper to. And there was an advertisement for a Crowley group there. And so I took the address down and all that, and I thought, well, I've been reading about this stuff for a few years. Never the armchair magician. Let's see what happens. So I wrote to them, and then a couple of days later, this unprepossessing character knocks on the door at where we're living, and he asked me if I'm ready to commit myself to the pursuit of the knowledge and conversation of my holy guardian angel. And to be honest, I had to think about it for a couple seconds. It was kind of like being asked to join the Jehovah's Witnesses. But I said, sure, why not? So, and then I got involved, and it was the O.T.O. I got involved in the O.T.O. for a brief time, and then also some variant of Crowley's AA. But the character I got involved with was an insalubrious type who had conflated doing what thou wilt with doing what you like, and which strangely enough happens to quite a few of these people who become interested in this sort of thing. But let's leave that for another conversation. But it was kind of a mess, because this character wound up actually finding his way into this house I was living in with Lisa at the time and all that. So, but no, I got seriously involved, and I believe that Grady McMurtry, who was one of the last people who knew Crowley in his last days in Netherwood and Hastings, and had resurrected the O.T.O. in the 70s in California, I think he officiated at my initiation. And but after a while, I just found it a bit. Crowley's a great raconteur, but it's a bit claustrophobic after a while. It's like all roads lead back to him. It's kind of boring after a while. But I dutifully read all the poetry and all of that. And I wrote a book about him. So I subsequently wrote, a book about him. And I said it's a book about kind of like, I got introduced to him in the context of rock and roll. And the occult was hip for rock and roll in the 60s for a while. And a lot of different figures from that world blended into the rock world, but then it kind of separated out. So you got, the 70s rock, cult, and roll. So, Black Sabbath and, Metallica and all that kind of stuff. So Crowley stayed in that realm, and there wasn't the nice rockers anymore in the same way in the occult world sort of thing. But he maintained this position as a kind of icon. I hate that word, but in the pop, and then even in rap, rap artists are into this kind of stuff. So the book is sort of like charting why did he stay the kind of figure for pop music in different forms when these other people from the 60s who were there, but then they kind of dropped out. And so mostly because he's like a, sex maniac and took lots of drugs. And he was like a wild guy. He was this wild, mad, bad, and, dangerous to know. And I'm saying that quickly because I've reading the guy for 50 years. So I have a casual, relations. It's off the cuff and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate the seriousness of what he tried to do in magic. But I think the reason why he stayed I mean, if you look at the like the rap thing, it's all the bling. I mean, the rap guys had all this bling. Crowley had all this bling on him all the time. He had all the jewels and this, and he loved all the insignia, and he loved getting like, he's like Trump. He loves getting, ooh, it's another thing with my name on it and something like that. And any case, so, but that was after a while, I just got tired of him, and I dropped out of it. So.
Yeah, well, he's always going to represent a counterculture, as you write. You can always look at Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Clubs Band to see who's who, and Jung makes it, Crowley makes it, Burroughs makes it. All these figures that, that really were still influential in the 70s and 80s and even today. So, and I always think it's interesting because David Bowie he disliked Jimmy Page and Grant. He thought they were too weird and all that. Like, what are you talking about? You're walking around with Nazi outfits, wanting England to be fat. It's like you have no room to criticize even Crowley.
Well, I mean, there's my David Bowie, Colin Wilson story where I told the story getting thrown out of Bowie's loft sometime in 1980 or 81 in New York because he basically was saying all this stuff about Colin Wilson that just wasn't true. But I was this is one of the reasons I did not. How should we say this? I never learned how one should truly act amongst the royalty of rock and all these kinds of things, and I just was like, well, actually, I don't think that's true. It's like contradicting him, and it went on for a while. And the fun part was that he had these 2 female bodyguards. And I think it's Diamonds Are Forever. It's one of the last Sean Connery Dr. No films. But there are these 2 female assassins, Thumper and Bambi. And they kind of fight Bond. But there was Thumper and Bambi at Bowie's, loft, and they escorted me out of the place. Oh, But it's okay. But hey, these people, they're great, fantastic musicians. They're geniuses. But I think sometimes they get their facts mixed up. So.
Yeah, especially when Bowie was putting stuff up his nose, which he had.
Oh, excuse me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, delusion was something. He embraced.
Sorry.
Yeah, well. Let's bring in Jung. I wanted to bring in Sherilyn to see if you have a question for the audience. I lean heavily on Gary's book, Jung the Mystic, for the Occult Elvis, and the David Bowie bio too. Elvis is just insane to put him through a Jungian lens. He's so complex and out there. Bowie's a lot easier because Bowie was into Jung, and he had a way where if he liked something, it just manifested in reality or his music. So you can track Bowie and Jungian ideas a lot easier, but Elvis is just on a parallel dimension. But Sherilyn, do you have a question for Gary?
Well,
you want to know about that book?
Well, I had a funny comment about the book because I have a similar story, and I thought, are all Jungian origin stories have this sort of divine blessed theft involved in them? I don't know.
Hermes stealing the cattle.
It is really that when you said that, I was like, oh my, I had forgotten actually until right now that I had been given, actually I found out about Jung through the album Synchronicity in 1983. I was a little kid and I listened to it in headphones and I thought, I don't know all these words. And I looked up all the words and oh my God, I knew it. I knew they were all lying to me. So that was the origin. But a good friend of mine gave me Man and His Symbols when I was in my early 20s because I was dreaming and I had kind of forgotten about Jung as a writer, a principal. It wasn't in my life. She said, you need to read this book. And I never gave it back.
Oh my God.
And I've thought about it because she actually was a boss, and then she ended up leaving. And I've thought about that for years because I had it rebound. I thought, should I just look her up and figure out where she is and send it? But at one point I had it rebound and I thought, you just need to accept the fact that you stole it and now it's yours. And there's this ambiguity there. So I empathize. And also just the fact that you're writing this book now about your own experience and however it came about or kind of strange it seems when you've been, writing about all of these other prominent folks. I think it's something that's just sort of coming up in the consciousness right now for people to share their sort of origin stories, and not just the origin, but how they made it happen, right? Because it's such a unique journey. It's so different. And to borrow on Wilson, to be this outsider character and survive. How do you do that? How did you get here? What steps along the way did you take to keep yourself sane, to keep yourself fed, And our mutual friend, Chris Knowles, just did a video of his little origin story, how I became esoteric. And I thought, what, this is exactly what I believe, what a lot of people need to hear right now. And I think, Miguel, what we've talked about maybe bringing up next year in an event, to say, praxis, what is the praxis of Gnosis? How in the hell do you do this? I think that's why most people just kind of hold it out here, because they can't imagine incorporating that into their lives. So I think it's almost in a way this idea of, I think it's called metalepsis, where you break the fourth wall, right? The narrator's coming into the action. So when you've had this position of being the narrator for so long, and here you come, and now you're in the action. It's must be a surreal feeling. I'd love to hear more about that. Does it feel kind of surreal to be talking about yourself in your book?
Well, I mean, in other interviews, I've said, it's an unusual book because I usually write about other people, and they're usually dead. So I'm, writing about myself, and with any luck, I'm still here and alive. But no, I mean, there's some interesting kind of sort of circularity or Ouroboros contours to the book itself, because just a spoiler, it ends with my leaving Los Angeles at the end of 1995 to get on a plane to come here to England and to start my new life at 40. And tangentially, even that, I think, is a Jungian thing, because Jungian, he did a lot about adult development. Freud's basically, it's over by the time you're 5. Just forget it, mate. That's it. You spend thousands, come see me twice a week. We'll get you through it, but your life's over. But no, Jung is like, no. The second half of life, that's the true time of individuation. So in a way, the book takes me up to, I'm 5 years old when I start the book, because that's when I'm basically saying, oh, this is when I start to learn how to read. And comic books introduced me to all this kind of stuff, cosmic stuff and other planets and, strange things outside of the
Jack Kirby.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. These alternative worlds other than the mundane everyday world. So, and then it ends with my deciding to plunge into life at 40 and see whether I can make it as a writer or not. And so I started writing the book in January of 2023, which would have been, I think, the 27th anniversary of my coming here. I ended the book January 2024. I didn't plan to end it then, but it just turned out that I ended it. My end is my beginning, as it were, 28. Now it's come out in the States, but it's coming out here in the UK in January next year. And that would be God's willing, the 30th anniversary of my arrival on these shores and all that. So there is this kind of Proustian sort of thing, if remembrance of things past. I'm not comparing my humble work to that, but the narrator begins the book that you've just read at the end of reading the book. He's about to go write the book that you've just read. So there's a kind of weird kind of thing like that. So, but I tell you, one of the things, talking about Gnosis, I mean, write about your life, and so much of it will come back to you, and it will be alive. I mean, to me, that's a kind of Gnosis. It's the sort of thing I was right. I mean, I even write about this car I had. I had Ford 1966 122S Volvos, and LA is one of the places where you can have all these ancient cars because the air is so dry that they don't rust. So I had in a row, and so I just liked them. They were European. It is fantastic. But I'm writing about the smell being in this car, which did not come back to me until I was writing about it and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, nobody else might, readers might not be that interested in it. And if I'm a good writer, they will. They'll at least get the sense of the evocation of that time and place. But for myself, it was like, oh my God, yes, this is the pristine experience from my past is becoming real to me again, not just factually. I know I had that car. I know it was like that. It's like, oh, I'm in the car again. And yes. And so, and other experiences like that. So that, and this is part, that Steiner has some, you know, I forget what he calls it, Rücksehen or something like that, where you look back over your past experience. And he kind of does it in a backward sort of thing, but I didn't do it like that. But you look back, but even that backward looking into your own experience, you can generate a sense of the reality of it, which is what Colin Wilson calls faculty X, you know, the ability to grasp the reality of other times and places, not nostalgia, but that they were real, that they really happened. We tend to be hypnotized thinking reality is whatever's right in front of me. But we all know reality exceeds the four walls in which we happen to find ourselves. But involuntarily, we tend to somehow unconsciously accept that's what's really real. And then when the reality of some other time and place where we had been comes back to us, we're somehow shaken out of the present moment we're in, and we realize reality extends much wider than that.
I think that it's interesting you say about the Volvos too. I had 4 240 Volvos right in a row for 20 years. That's all I wanted.
What, are we twins separated at birth?
As soon as you said that, I could smell the car. And my older son say, Mom, that sound of the Volvo, I can hear every sound, the way the door shuts, the way the seatbelt clicks, like everything, you know. So
it makes me want to go out and get one, you know.
I know. I will see them sometimes out here in Montana. I'm like, oh, you know, I lost my last one when I moved out here 12 years ago. But you know, what you're saying, it also reminds me of Castaneda's recapitulation, right? That, well, Don Juan's, you know, that he had Castaneda do. And that's what I thought when I saw Chris Knowles' presentation this weekend, was like, he's doing the recapitulation. And it's almost this magical working of bringing this thing, not under your control, but giving it a power that's not where you're not under it anymore, right? You're not under these happenings. You somehow are in relationship to them, you know, and giving them a life that where you can be more of an observer. Because I'll come back to, I do think it's really unique if you've lived a life as this idea of being an outsider or a gnosis until you look back on it. Because I think you'll have comments from people, everyone, how did you do that? Or that's amazing. And you just say, yeah, I'm just doing it because I have to. But then when you put it all together, it really is. It's a magical quest. It's a real hero's journey to be able to do that and survive it. So I just really appreciate you bringing this forward right now. I think it's exactly what the world needs to hear on so many levels.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure. I think it's something that, you know, it would probably be beneficial for people to do it. And I'm reminded of the poet Wordsworth, who talked about recollection and tranquility. So even some horrible experience of your life, if you can master it or get above it or absorb it or integrate it by writing about it in this way, and getting it's a strange way because you integrate it by initially, so there's a distance from it, because we tend to be, you have to get a little distance from yourself in order to actually see yourself in a way, which is, again, we can get into linguistics kinds of, you know, muddles here, but in a way you have to lose yourself in order to find yourself in a certain sense in which, you know, I think to write effectively about yourself, tell yourself story, you need to be able to get a little bit of distance, and you need not to worry about what your friends are going to think, which is one of the first, I mean, really and truly, it sounds like banal, but that's like one of the first things you have to do. So I just have to tell the story as I can tell it and not worry about how my friends are going to react to this and all of that. And then if you can do that, and then you're rising above a level of yourself in which you are worried about. And that's a little level other than your personal ego, which would be worried about what people are going to think about you saying what you said about them. And if you can do that, that's the beginning of you having some distance from your own life, and then you can perceive it objectively in a certain way. And then you can see these connections. You can see these things that at different times in your life, something has happened to keep you going in this direction you've been going in. You know, provided you've been going in a direction. Not everybody has been, but you might not know whether you've been going in a direction until you try to find out whether you have or not. You know, until you start looking at this, and then you might see, oh my God, yeah, that happened, and that happened, that kind of thing. I mean, Schopenhauer, I forget the essay, but there's an essay of his where he talks about this whole idea that, we experience our life in these little bits and pieces that happen, but if you can see it over time, there's a pattern there. And there's a kind of overall sort of pattern that well, Jung would say the self, in some way is somehow directing you towards these experiences to help it or him or her, emerge, or help you, your ego, open up and widen so that you become aware of this larger kind of directive in your life. So, but I think what you're saying, like trying to tell yourself your own story, and make it up. It's your story, if you have to, make up a bit of it, whatever, writers, they always talk about telling the truth. The writers always say they're telling the truth. The ones who are probably making up, the really good stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you, Gary and Sherilyn, you two youngins at least have solved a puzzle I've wondered, stealing young books. Now I realize why the Red Book is so big, because it's so hard to steal, right? You can't just walk out of a store or your friend's house.
They got wise to that. They said, you know what? No more of this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You
Wow.
youngin' thieves. But it is interesting, about you were just saying, Gary, and your life, because that's what I see. I see there's Gary, and he's here because he wants Gnosis, self-knowledge, who I am. But he's also like, okay, I need to know who I am, but also need to know, what am I going to do? Am I a rock star, a science writer? Do I work at a bookshop? It doesn't feel right. It's almost like this stage where it's super tramp, logical song, who I am. Then it's Genesis, carpet crawlers. You got to get in to get out. But then there's always Bachman Turner Overdrive, taking care of business. I still need to pay the bills, and you're sort of in this loop. And
yeah. No, it's true. It's well, I tried. After I was in the hallowed halls of rock and roll for many years, and then that ended for a variety of reasons, and I found myself having to find a place for myself in the real world. And it was, I in another interview, I said it was sort of like, having been, brought up in captivity and then sent back out into the wild. I just wasn't ready for it. Like, I had what do I do to make a living here in the real world? I mean, okay, I have to work at a shop or something. So the whole idea of a career, like, real kind of thing, so it took a long time, and I tried. I tried to have an academic career. I mean, I enjoyed philosophy. I mean, that was my career choice after rock and roll. I was going to teach philosophy. My philosophy professors, they thought I was out of my mind. This was absolutely incomprehensible. We want to do what you used to do. Why do you want to do this boring stuff? We absolutely hate our life. It's boring as hell. It's like they're basically saying they couldn't believe it, but they got a kick out of it that I was into it. That was,
but also political correctness also drove you.
Well, I mean, I mean, that's
like Woodsworth and the Cloud and.
No, the beginning of that, I got the first whiffs of that. Well, I would have went back from 85 to 90. I got a degree in philosophy at the University in Los Angeles. At the same time, I was working at the preeminent New Age bookshop west of the Rockies, the Bodhi Tree, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was very well known in its day in Los Angeles. So I was, studying Hegel and Wittgenstein by day and talking to people about their auras and crystals and stuff like that by night. So I was getting both, which I think in some ways had an influence on the books I later write, because I'm interested in all that, stuff, the strange stuff, but I do take a kind of philosophical approach to it. At least I'm open to ideas and try to understand it. But but that's what was going on. But the PC thing, that really, after I got the degree in philosophy, which I really enjoyed, again, I was not quite sure, if I wanted to teach, which I thought I wanted to do, teach philosophy, I'd have to go on and get, MA and PhD and all that kind of thing. And the only place really in the States to do that was over on the East Coast, Stony Brook, because I was interested in continental philosophy, so existentialism, Heidegger and Nietzsche and stuff like that. But I got involved with someone at the bookshop, and she soon after got a very, very well-paying job at Sony Studios. So the exigencies of life decided, okay, well, maybe I'll stay here. But then I wound up starting MA program in English literature at University of Southern California. And by that time, this would have been 92, 93, something like that. Yeah, the PC thing had really, or whatever you want to call it, it's just a PC, but also it was like all these very hip theoretical approaches that I had no interest in: deconstructionism, postmodernism, feminism, post-colonialism. It was post, every post-toastyism. It was post everything. And I was an old romantic humanist who just, I remember there was one incident we were doing the Romantics, and this is, the harmless poem by Wordsworth about the daffodils and all this kind of thing.
Right.
And someone was saying about his incestuous desires for his sister and all this kind of thing. And I'm just saying, that is beautiful. And they all turned on me. Like I was like, oh, you essentialist. They're just like, ooh, I was some horrible creature. Just, but
They call you a Platonist or something?
I was a Platonist. I don't know what I was. I don't know what I was. All I know is like, it's a beautiful poem. Maybe he did want to sleep with his sister. I have no idea, but I don't think he's saying that in this poem. But and it was kind of like, what are you doing here? And that was, what am I doing here? So that was, and I was saved by that from out of the blue, from a surprise royalty check from Blondie. I was touched by the presence then, for sure, because it was like, how many more digits than I had expected to see, ever again. And so I was able to say I'm not coming back for the next, semester. And then I decided to write a novel. I had an idea for an occult thriller. One character was the bad magician was Aleister Crowley, and the good magician was Rudolf Steiner. And there was some woman psychic who they were battling over in between or whatever. So it was fun to try it. I didn't finish it. It turned into pastiche, but I really enjoyed doing that. And I was able to pay my share of the rent and such things when I was living with the woman who I subsequently came to refer to affectionately as my future ex-wife. But she got tired of me not working anywhere and thinking this money that I'm throwing away on rent we could have used for something else, and so I came up with the plan that I would apply for jobs that I couldn't, I maybe just might be able to get, but there was one thing missing, that I wouldn't get the job. And it worked a couple times, and this was like, hey honey, I'm looking for work and all that. Meanwhile, I'm writing away, trying to write, and by that time I'm writing articles for I don't know if you remember Gnosis magazine from in the 90s. Of
course, yeah.
Gnosis magazine, and there was Quest, and there was other magazines, and at the bookshop they had put out a catalog. It was like a book review section, and had reviewed this fantastic book called The Passion of the Western Mind by Richard Tarnas that came out in the early 90s. And it's a remarkable, intellectual history of the West from a spiritually friendly position. Although it's very, very well written. It's a great history of it. In any case, he came into the shop. He so enjoyed the review that he invited me to write for a journal he was editing called Revision, that Ken Wilber used to. So in any case, I started doing little bits, articles, book reviews, things like that. And so one day my lovely future ex-wife saw an advertisement in the Los Angeles Times for a science writer at the University of California they were looking for. And I had written some articles about chaos theory and complexity and the pop science at the time, and reviewed some of that books. So she said, no, send him some of just send him some of your stuff. I said, well, look, I have no background in science. Oh, no, I have no background in science whatsoever. I really never really liked science very much and all that. Just send him your stuff. I said, okay, I will never get this job. And lo and behold, they got back to me and said, when did I want to start? So there's wisdom there. If there's something you really want, you have to convince yourself you don't want it.
Right.
And then just send stuff out there. Don't worry about it, and then you'll get it. So I was like, my God, I didn't want this job, and here it is. But it was like, it's like a very hefty salary. Had my own parking space. Had an office. Had a secretary, and all that. So I'm approaching 40, quicker than I'd like. The ETA is arriving, faster than I would expect, and all that. And so I'm okay. Maybe I'm not going to be the writer want to be, and maybe I'm not going to, but I used to be pop music. I've got some hit records. I've done all this stuff lots of people haven't done. So shouldn't I be happy? And here I am making lots of money, and I'm working on the cutting edge and telling the alumni about the wonderful things the microbiology department is doing. And funnily enough, you mentioned Castaneda. He was still alive at the time. And when I was shown the alumni files, one file they said, at no time should you ever approach, because the whole idea was to approach people for money, alumni for donors and all that, for donations. You should never approach this person. And it was Castaneda. So it was kind of like a special thing that no one, it was like off limits, and he lived not, literally a stone's throw away. This would have been when did I start? 94. Yeah. So any case, I thought, okay, here I am. The wife's got a wonderful job. We have a fantastic, 2-bedroom flat in a gated community in part of LA near the La Brea tar pits and the LA County Museum. And it's as central as you can get in LA. What's the problem? What's wrong? Can't you be happy just like everybody else? And I'm walking across the campus. I'm trying to convince myself of this. And say, yeah, I can do. Yeah, let's put aside all that. We're still young and all that. And then there's that wonderful, I think it's Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy me. And whatever it was within me that wanted to come out said, no, this ain't working out. And bang, no, came up, very strongly. And then I thought, you know what, no matter how much I try to convince myself, I'm never going to be happy doing this. And then after that, everything fell apart. The marriage fell apart. I fell apart. I lost the job. And I literally really went down the tubes. And, there's several pages of my nervous breakdown in there and all that, which I guess is typical, what is it? Midlife crisis. I was approaching 40. And so if I ever was going to do what I wound up doing, I had to get out of that situation. And it wasn't, didn't blame the wife, nothing like that. I just wasn't doing what I, really should have been doing. And whatever is involved in me somehow figured, okay, this guy's worth individuating, but we got to get him out of here. And he's not doing what he needs to do. And so Hesse says somewhere, and Jung says the same thing in different language, but more or less the same thing. If you don't heed the call of the unconscious will do what it has to do, regardless, and it's not going to be a picnic. And
it might even snuff you out.
Well, yeah. I mean,
not playing around.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we have need of you, and if we can't use you, we'll get rid of you. So
we'll find another avatar. We'll find another.
Exactly. So whatever happened, I went down the tubes, and what saved me was going to this conference on the Rosicrucians at a little place called Český Krumlov, which is a small town on the Czech border with Austria. And this Gnosis magazine was sponsoring it. And there's a place in New York called the Open Center that was sponsoring it. I think they're still going. And a lot of names from back then were there, like Jocelyn Godwin, Jeffrey Ash, Robert Bly. He was one of the big names. Jean Michel, Nicholas Goodrich Clark. So a lot of people say maybe a generation earlier, names in the esoteric community were at this conference, and it was a fantastic place. It was this chocolate box, untouched. Actually, it was so much like a fairy tale that they were filming a Pinocchio film there. It was Martin Landau. Apparently it was a flop. I haven't seen it. I wonder if Jordan Peterson has seen it, because he's always made a big deal about Pinocchio and all that. So, but it just was and I met people there at this conference. I met one guy actually I knew from LA, but we should have hooked up earlier because we had similar interests. He's a filmmaker named Adam Simon, and he was interested in the occult and esotericism and Lovecraft and all that. But he's a filmmaker and all that, and he was at this thing, and he had friends from London, and they were there, and he introduced me to them. And I basically told them my sad story, you know, that my life had fallen apart. And he said, well, you know, if you want to get a change of scenery, come hang out in London for a while and we'll put you up and we'll see what happens. So I went back to LA. This is the end of 95, and sold everything I could sell, gave away everything I couldn't sell, and put everything else I wanted into storage, and hopped on a plane at LAX January 1, 1996, and made for these shores. So, and I've been here ever since.
As Paul Harvey said, and now you know the rest of the story. Yeah, it does end with a cliffhanger, and I'm glad I know what happens with the rest of the story too. I love, and I've got to mention this, you hanging out with Colin Wilson. It was so jealous, but so eccentric how you would sit in his living room for dinner, and there was no dining. Everybody would just sit on the couch.
Sit on our lap.
Yeah, the food, and
he's sitting in this recliner with, like, you know, the bottles of wine over there next to him. He's actually literally throwing scraps to the dog or something, and he's just talking. He's watching the news at the same time. Yeah, and he's yelling at it. He was interesting. Well, eccentric. He's one of these English eccentrics, but he would get up, I think, at 5 a.m. or something like that, or 6, or fairly early. He would spend a little time reading. Then he had this. I never saw it. He had this study like down in the, you know, the basement of this house that he lived in he moved in 1957, you know, with his wife Joy, and then he would emerge like late afternoon after writing however many thousands of words that day, take the dogs for a walk, then he'd come back, and then he would have smoked salmon and avocado, glass of white wine. Joy's making the dinner, and whoever's there would be hanging out, having the smoked salmon, the white wine, sitting, talking, the dogs going, and I got to know the whole family. I mean, I went on this what I call a mini search in the miraculous in 1983, and part of which was a pilgrimage to Colin's house in Cornwall, in a tiny place called Gorin Haven. I mean, now it's all built up. Now, even then, it wasn't as built up. And he went there in the 50s. It was absolutely desolate. There was nothing there. But I also went to Glastonbury and dowsed on the tour, and went to Chartres and did the labyrinth, and went to the site of Gurdjieff's Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man in Fontainebleau, outside of Paris, because at that time I was involved in the Gurdjieff work. That was the thing I got into a few years after getting involved with Crowley. I get into the Gurdjieff work for a legitimate group associated with the Gurdjieff Foundation. There's quite a few bogus groups out there, but I was involved in that for about 5 years, and one of the things was going to that. And let me tell you, I got more out of being involved with the Fourth Way group than I got out of being in the Crowley group and all that. But no, it was fantastic. And then after this pilgrimage in 1983, we became friends and correspondents, and he wound up writing an introduction to one of my books called The Secret History of Consciousness. I wound up writing introductions to reissues of several of his books, one of which was The Outsider, which was his first book. And my editor at the time, Mitch Horowitz, he was my editor at Penguin, and he commissioned my book about Wilson called Beyond the Robot, The Life and Work of Colin Wilson. That came out, I think, 2015. He died in 2013. So we had like a 30-year, relationship, as it were, or friendship, and I consider him a mentor. Although he didn't specifically do anything, but if I have any, if I am all readable, it's because I, obsessively read and reread his books over and over. Somebody once said that he could make the telephone directory seem gripping. So he had this wonderful just narrative. You don't want to put the book down. So that to me is like, that's the job. The writer has to do that. If you can do that, then you can entertain the reader with any ideas you have, but you have to be able to keep them doing that. So that's why I'm not an academic. I have no academic career because I'm too readable.
Makes sense. Well, as we're getting towards the end of the interview, Sherilyn, any last question you might have for Mr. Gary Lachman?
Oh, I just, in the comments here, it's funny, said Frank was a Volvo man. Sus Rando loved your stunt with the Red Book, Miguel. That was great. And about your employment tactics or non-employment tactics, Gary, Frank says that he has a son who has perfected that technique.
We all know somebody. We all have a relative that does it.
Well, it's just a fascinating story of your life, looking at it as just a story. And one thing that touched me is that, those of us who've decided to stay outside of the academy. And on one hand, it's a real shame because we have lost, I think, probably 30 solid years of institutional knowledge and memory and, just sort of solid building on what our ancestors, so lovingly brought forth. And that's a shame. But what we've had to do, if you're staying outside of the academy, as you say, you have to find another way to make it work. And so you're bringing all of those things as a philosopher, as a metaphysician into your writing. You have to find a way to put these two things together. And I think integrating that praxis is infusing all of these fields in a way that could never have happened within the academy. So to me, that's really fascinating. I'm interested to see how what that becomes in the future, and Wilson noted that in The Outsider, citing, it was funny because I read Lawrence's account of the Arab Revolt, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and then I read Wilson's The Outsider not knowing that he cited him so heavily in that. Wait. But one of the things that he said in there, that quoting Lawrence, was saying that, the world we're in, he was saying about back then, and I think it's so relevant for today, is that ours is a war of preaching and not of fighting. The war, where we are right now and the conflicts in our culture and society, this isn't about stuff. It's not about finding literal enemies. It's about sharing our experiences and sharing this wisdom. And this is the most powerful weapon, if you will, most powerful instrument that we have. And I really appreciate you bringing this forth. Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, there's the most powerful thing in the world is an awake human being, I would say. An awake, conscious human being can make changes, even if they might not even know the changes that they make. But one thing I was going to say, there are some people in the academy doing good work. Jeffrey Kripal, I mean, if you know his work, I mean, he's written loads about the influence of comic books and popular culture as the conduit for these ideas and all that. So, there's some people doing good work, but I think it's about. I think one of the problems with the academy is you wind up talking to the other professors and all that, and then you go to conferences and all that kind of thing. Whereas I want to just talk to other interested people that are interested in ideas. Because I don't know this. It's not like I know all this stuff and I'm just laying it down. I'm trying to understand it just as much as anyone, and bringing the reader along as I'm trying to understand it. That's what I'm trying to do. It's well, let's look at it now. Where are we now? That kind of thing. And say, here's the conclusions I've come to. And, so I always, and I think that somehow that narrative is way of writing is something that's like that. It's hackney, but you're inviting the reader to come with you on a journey or on a voyage or something. You're getting somewhere. You're trying to get somewhere there, and nothing is as exciting to me as that process of awakening and understanding something, which is it's a form of gnosis as well. Actually, I a few weeks ago delivered a book that won't see the light of day until next year, but it's about what I call the of course effect. So and something that you feel you're absolutely familiar with, it like the back of your hand, and then suddenly it strikes you as strange, and then my God, of course, and then you spend hours trying to figure out what was I saying of course about. And that's what I think. That's what all philosophy is. Philosophy is of course, and then there's a long treatise of what you were saying of course. Of course. So any case, that's a taster for next year.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to it. Yes. And for the audience, definitely check out Touch by the Presence. A lot more in there, a lot of lessons you'll understand, and amazing things you will learn about our history. And again, the challenges that Gary went through, you will relate to, and hopefully you'll find how you can grow and pivot through life. But we are at the end. Again, you can find this on my Substack with the bonus. Patreons will also get a bonus half an hour more where I'll break down Gary's book and talk about things that we didn't even cover this because there's so much. And please support Aeon Byte and Gen X Wasteland. And tomorrow we will actually have a great show on Jung and Faustus and Goethe. So we will continue with these energies, but on this journey we're over. Sherilyn, thanks for keeping us company until you just started your own Substack. Tell the audience about that.
Oh yes, you can find my work in writing and some videos at Dr. Sherilyn H.T. Jones on Substack. And yeah, check it out. I'm building a really great community there, and I'm really honored to have all the input that I can receive. So thanks, Miguel.
Awesome. We'll keep at it. And
If I could just say, if you go to my blog, which is gary-lachman.com, my son has made a short formative film
I watched it,
promoting the book, and check it out. I think he's got possibilities there. So there's a link to the film. It's up on YouTube, and check it out, and tell him what you liked it.
Yeah, I have your website here on the show notes, and I did watch the film. It's a good film. Well directed. So got it all.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, Gary, as always, thanks for coming on the show. Always enjoy having you on. And yeah, good luck with, of course, and everything else coming down.
You as well. Take care. And lovely to meet you, Cheryl.
Nice
and good to see you, Miguel. And look forward to seeing you in the future.
Awesome. Always, always. And for everybody else, hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk tomorrow. And until then, as I say, write your own gospel, live your own myth,